Thank you, Dr. Perlman. That was like a lot of great information. Thank you. So next on the schedule, we're going to talk about assistive technology and strategies to mitigate speech and swallowing impairment with ataxia. And here to talk to us today about that is Caitlin Cloud. So let me tell you a little bit about Caitlin. Caitlin is a speech and language pathologist who has worked clinically with people affected by ataxia. And she has partnered with patients and families as they navigate the challenges and the changes with speech and swallowing. And what you might not know about Caitlin is she competitively powerlifts, and also she loves animals with long necks. So without further ado, help me in welcoming Caitlin.
Thank you for that introduction. Can y'all hear me okay? Perfect, okay. I haven't used one of these kinds of microphones before, so I'm learning too, it's great. As Dana said, I am a speech-language pathologist. I'm also currently a PhD student at the University of Nebraska, so shout out to the Nebraskans in the crowd. There's a whole group of us, I know. I kind of got my start doing research in ataxia as a master's student, and I was really investigating speech impairments in ataxia. And then I worked clinically as a hospital-based speech-language pathologist, and then came back to school for my PhD, especially after seeing, how important swallowing and eating and drinking is for people, and how important it is for just health and longevity, because swallowing impairments can have some pretty drastic consequences. And so swallowing research is really important to me, and that's what I'm focused on as a PhD student. And so all that said, I'm really honored to be here and to share what I know and also learn from all of you. So let's get started. We've got a whole bunch to cover in this 30 minutes, so we'll get right into it. I don't have any financial or non-financial disclosures. I'll just note that if I mention any companies or products, it doesn't signify endorsement. It's just for informational purposes. And of course, I encourage you to work with a licensed SLP if you have any concerns about your speech and swallowing. So with that, our topics for today, we are going to talk a little about the impacts of ataxia on speech and swallowing, kind of get the lay of the land and set the stage. And then we'll talk about some strategies, interventions, and assistive tools for managing speech and swallowing impairments. So first of all, how does ataxia affect speech and swallowing? So we know that ataxia affects the cerebellum and its pathways, and this leads to problems with coordination of movement. And to produce speech, we have to use a whole lot of muscles that have to work together in a really coordinated fashion. So it's understandable that people can experience some trouble with their speech. When we speak, producing speech starts in the lungs. So we inhale, and then that air drives up through the rest of the speech system and is shaped at various levels so that we can produce words and sentences. I was trying to use the laser pointer, but I don't know. It's fine, it's fine. So when we go to speak, we breathe into our lungs, and then as we exhale, the air travels up through the windpipe to the larynx, or the voice box, as you might know it colloquially. There, the vocal cords vibrate, and that's what gives us the initial sound signal for our voice. Those sound waves are then shaped as they go up through the throat and the mouth and the nose. They resonate there. I kind of like to think of it as, the vocal cords are almost kind of like strings on a guitar in the way that they vibrate to produce sound, but then the throat and the mouth and the nose shape the sound in the same way that the body of a guitar kind of enhances and amplifies the sound. Resonance is a notoriously difficult concept to describe. And then, of course, we have our articulators. That's the teeth, the tongue, the lips, the palate, and we use all of those structures in our mouths to further shape the sound and to produce specific speech sounds and words. And then we have, beyond that kind of sound and word level, we have what we call prosody. And that's just the rate, rhythm, and flow of speech. And ataxia can really affect each one of these symptoms. It can affect every stage of this process. So what can that look like and feel like and sound like? In terms of breath and voice control, some people with ataxia may find that they seem to run out of air when speaking, or they have trouble controlling the pitch and loudness of their voice, or maybe they have changes in their voice quality. Like sometimes it sounds kind of breathy or hoarse, and they may feel they don't have great control over that. In terms of resonance, you might find that your voice sounds more nasal than it used to, kind of like this, where there's too much air coming out your nose, or it can sound less nasal than it used to, almost like you have a cold like this, and there's not enough airflow through the nose. So those kinds of changes can happen, and they may not be present all the time. They can kind of come and go. Now with ataxia, we often see the most difficulty with articulation and prosody. So some things you might notice are speech sounds may come out kind of distorted, or maybe the wrong sounds come out at times. So maybe you try to say the sound V, and it comes out as more of a B sound, B, things like that. You also might notice that sounds and syllables kind of run together sometimes, especially in longer words. We call this process telescoping because it's like a telescope kind of collapsing in on itself. The word telescope you might try to say, and it might come out more as telescope, like that middle syllable kind of disappears. And so you might even still be able to understand the word, but it sounds a bit different. In terms of prosody, you may notice changes in the rate and rhythm and flow of your speech over time. And on the whole, all of these kinds of features can lead to this perception of what a lot of patients have described to me as feeling their speech is slurred, or in more clinical terms, we might say that speech is imprecise or inefficient or kind of unnatural sounding. Over time, if speech difficulties progress, it can make it harder for your speech to be understood by others as well. Now shifting gears a little bit to swallowing. So swallowing uses much the same structures and muscles as speech. And so it's natural that if we can have some incoordination in speech, we can have some incoordination in swallowing too. You may notice before you even get to swallowing that it's harder to use utensils and cups due to tremors or issues with dexterity in the fingers or incoordination of arm movements. And then once you get to the point of actually eating and drinking, you may notice that it's harder to kind of control where food and drink goes in your mouth. It may take longer, after you've chewed up a bite of something to kind of get it all into one piece to swallow down. There may be changes in the coordination of your breathing and swallowing. So usually when we swallow, and if you want to try this now with your saliva or a sip of water, and just think about how you're breathing. So usually what we do is we inhale, we kind of start to exhale, and then we swallow and finish exhaling. So it's kind of inhale, swallow, exhale. With ataxia, if there's some incoordination in this really kind of fine-tuned process, you might swallow and then inhale. And that could just make it a little more likely that things go down the wrong pipe. And that's not something that anybody enjoys, right? We can see that ataxia can affect how well the airway closes during the swallow and just the timing of the swallowing sequence as a whole. I've got this picture and then I have some videos I'm going to show you. So what you'll see here, this picture just depicts kind of the process of swallowing. That fun little green blob that's in there represents a bite of food. It's collected on the tongue after it's been chewed up. The tongue pushes it back and down into the throat. And then the throat muscles squeeze that bite of food down into the esophagus, which is just the tube connecting the throat to the stomach. Something you'll notice is right beside, well, you kind of see that blue tube in the front of the neck, right? That there is the windpipe or the trachea. And that is where we don't want food and drink to go. And you'll notice it is quite close to where that opening to the esophagus is, right? So if there is some incoordination in this process and how all these muscles work together, that's when we can experience aspiration or something going down the wrong pipe or choking, those kinds of symptoms. Now let's watch it in action. My husband hates it when I start showing him swallowing videos. It makes him a little bit squeamish. He just feels weird about watching it. I think it's super cool. If it seems weird to you, you can look away, but personally I think it's interesting. So in this video, what you'll see, this individual's just taking a sip of liquid like water, and you're gonna see this process where it's pushed to the back of the throat, and then it goes down, right down the hatch. And there it goes. And you'll notice there's that kind of white tube in the front. Again, that's the windpipe. And that kind of, again, I can't use the laser pointer, but that sort of gray area right above that is the voice box where the vocal cords are. And you notice that that kind of raises up in the throat and closes off to prevent things from going down the wrong way. So now what the heck can it look like when things go wrong? Let's take a look. So in this video first, we're gonna watch another normal swallow. Oh no, maybe, hopefully. This video was giving us trouble yesterday too, so we can always skip it if we need. I'm gonna give it a second to try to work. I think they're trying to help me behind the scenes too. This video is interesting because the second video is going to show some of the liquid going down the windpipe instead of going down the esophagus, if it'll play. If not, who knows? Maybe I'll share it. I have a link at the end of the presentation to a bunch of extra resources, and I'll just add this video so that if y'all are interested, you can go and watch it. This one, I think, should cooperate. Yep. So in this one, a patient is eating a bite of probably a cookie. That's what we usually use during these studies, is like a shortbread cookie. And here they are. They've collected it on their tongue. They're going to swallow it down. And oh yeah, I heard some, it kind of got stuck in the throat, right? So this is an individual who actually has some impairments in the strength of their throat muscles. And so as a result, they get food sticking in their throat quite a bit. So if you have a type of ataxia that causes strength problems, this is something that we can see. Even with incoordination though, if the timing of that squeeze isn't right on cue, then sometimes you can still get kind of some food and drink sitting in the throat longer than we expect it to or want it to. So now that I've told you about all the fun things that can go wrong, let's talk about what we can do about it and what we know. I'm gonna preface this by saying, there's a lot of research still being done in speech-language pathology. We're still kind of learning the best ways to treat impairments in coordination, both in terms of speech and swallowing. We've already made some really great progress, but there's certainly a chance that y'all have questions that I don't fully have the answers to. But let's talk about what is kind of currently available, what we do. So if you get a referral to see a speech therapist from your neurologist or your doctor, it's always gonna start with an evaluation. So you'll probably go in for an office visit. You might go to a hospital or a clinic and you'll see a speech pathologist and they'll do a bunch of testing with you. If you have swallowing concerns, they might refer you for a swallow study. So those videos I just showed you were from one type of swallow study where we take x-rays of your swallowing. From there, we move into treatment. So treatment, we might use a few different types of approaches. We can focus on rehabilitation, which is where we're really trying to modify the underlying issue. So this might mean doing exercises and lots of practice to kind of retrain movement patterns in the brain. We also sometimes use compensation or compensatory strategies. And this is where we work with you to develop strategies that support your communication and swallowing. And often we use these kinds of strategies to reduce the impact of an impairment in your life. They aren't necessarily targeting the underlying physiology, like the underlying incoordination, but they can help you communicate effectively, they can help you eat more comfortably, things like that. And compensation includes the use of things like assistive technology and adaptive devices. Additionally, we always incorporate like education into speech therapy so you know what's going on with your body. And we also do family and caregiver training. Our partners and family members and caregivers are really poised to help kind of reduce the communication burden that people with ataxia can experience, because it just gets harder and more psychologically demanding to communicate if you are having some trouble with that. So we love partnering with family members and caregivers throughout the treatment process, if it makes sense for the given situation. I want to note, all these approaches, they're not mutually exclusive. A lot of the time we're doing a little bit of everything. So maybe we're doing some swallowing exercises to make your swallowing better, but then we're also using some adaptive tools or maybe a difference in head position, other strategies to help in the here and now with your meal times while we try to improve the function itself. I have a couple slides here on examples of treatment targets for both speech and swallowing. I won't go into detail here just for the sake of time, but rehabilitation, again, it's exercise-based, lots of practice. Compensation is more the use of in-the-moment strategies. Same goes for swallowing as for speech. With swallowing compensation, some of the things we might do is, adjust the environment. Maybe you swallow better when there aren't a lot of distractions around. Altering the consistency of the foods and liquids you're eating and drinking, or changing the sensory characteristics of what you're eating and drinking. With ataxia, sometimes there's some sensory loss that's associated with that. So if you might swallow better if you drink cold liquids instead of room temperature, or something that's sour and fizzy instead of plain water. It's not to say water's not important, right? But there's lots of avenues we can kind of take to find what works for you. Other things we might do include adjusting posture and head position when swallowing. I will note, I wouldn't start using, tucking your chin or turning your head on your own. Ideally, you get a swallow study first, because these kinds of strategies work really well for some people and can actually be harmful for others. So the name of the game is just individualizing treatment, regardless of what approach we're taking. And then, of course, we might incorporate some mindfulness strategies and the use of adaptive utensils and things like that. Okay, and so now we get into the last kind of chunk of our talk today, which is assistive technology and adaptive equipment. So I'm going to chat first about what we call augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC. Hopefully it's not confusing since we're at AAC. Should make it easy to remember though. And then after we talk about AAC, we'll touch on swallowing tools, and then we'll wrap up. So AAC just refers to any tool that you use to support your communication. And all of us really use AAC to some extent, because AAC includes things like gestures and body language and facial expressions, our natural communicative behaviors. Those go beyond speech, right, to help us communicate whatever message we're trying to send. AAC also includes things like writing and drawing, as well as the more high-tech kinds of devices that output speech. Things like, your tablet-like speech-generating devices, or apps you can even download on your smartphone. Now, a point I like to drive home with most of the patients and clients I work with is that you don't have to rely on any one strategy. And often we see the most success when we focus on what we call multimodal communication, or basically using all of the tools available to you, finding what works for you, and just using whatever you need to communicate in the situations where you want to communicate. So all of these things can work together. They're not mutually exclusive. Same idea here. So AAC can be your primary way to communicate. This might be the case in advanced neurologic disease, where the capacity for speech has really diminished over time. And so someone might rely more on using a communication device. But it can also be used to augment your speech or as a tool for specific situations. So maybe phone calls are really challenging because people can't read your body language and your facial expression. So maybe you use some sort of text-to-speech software to make phone calls easier. Or maybe it's hard for you to be understood in a noisy room, but if you write down some keywords as you go, your communication partner can understand you very well. So AAC can be context-specific, and it can include a whole host of different tools. Now, there are some unique challenges to AAC associated with ataxia. The first one being access, which is just how a system is manipulated. Using a tablet, touching icons on a screen might not work very well for you if you have some problems with the coordination of your arms and hand movements. Similarly, eye tracking technology is really cool because you can look at a screen and look at what you want to say, and then it'll output the speech. But if you have nystagmus or vision impairments, that might not be the best fit for you. The great news is there's some really cool technologies that have been coming out. There's head pointing, where you can point where you want on a device with your head movements. There's even brain-computer interfaces. There's really cool things happening here. So hopefully access isn't too big of a barrier for most. Also, just portability of an AAC system and finding a system that can adapt over time for your needs is important when dealing with a progressive condition like ataxia. Now, I really wanted to make sure I touched on voice banking and message banking because I've heard a lot of interest for these kinds of voice preservation services in the ataxia community. We don't have much in the way of research specifically related to ataxia, but the processes of voice and message banking are commonly used with other neurologic conditions such as ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. Voice banking is just the process of recording your speech to create a synthetic voice that approximates your natural voice. So in order to do voice banking, you have to record yourself speaking, words and sentences for a solid 4 to 6 hours, which can be broken up over time, luckily. And a company will take all of that data and use it to create a synthetic voice that sounds like you, and that can be uploaded to a communication device at a later time, which is pretty darn cool, right? This differs, though, from the process of message banking. And message banking is just where you record personally meaningful messages in your own voice and your own inflection, and those are uploaded to a communication device or app at a later time for more just like a general audio playback option, just like if you were hitting play on a song or a voice memo. Now, the third bullet here is something I'm really excited about personally. I've never had the chance to use it with a client, so I've never had to troubleshoot it. But there's this process called double dipping developed by John Costello at Boston Children's Hospital. And this is where, if you've already done message banking, you can take those messages, and then those can be used as the input for voice banking to create a synthetic voice, so that you don't have to go through this whole process twice, essentially. So there's some really cool options out there. Now, several different options are available as far as what company or service you use. Big thing here is if you think this might be right for you, it's best to start early. But if you don't start as early as you'd like, it doesn't mean you can't do it. Another thing to consider is just what type of ataxia do you have, what's your prognosis, and how much is your ataxia expected to affect your speech? Because some people with ataxia can continue to communicate with their natural speech for their entire lives, whereas others might see their speech decline more rapidly or more severely. So it's very important, to talk to your doctor so that you can really decide what's right for you here. All right, so I'm going to back up. We talked about voice and message banking. I'm going to touch a little more on the different kind of high-tech types of AAC, just keeping in mind that AAC systems include a lot of different tools. There are phone and tablet applications available. Some of these are free or low cost. They're easy to access, but they may have fewer features and be less customizable than some of the dedicated communication devices out there. They can be a great start, and they can work really well for some people. Dedicated devices are those high-tech ones that are generally covered by insurance as long as you have an appropriate evaluation and documentation, and they're actually considered durable medical equipment. So if you've already dealt with, getting durable medical equipment, whether it's a wheelchair or a walker or something else, similar kinds of rules apply to getting a communication device, getting it updated, things like that. I do want to note there are alternative funding sources available if insurance isn't really working out for you as a route to take. And so, again, in all the resources I have linked at the end here, I included some funding resources too. Now, these are just some general recommendations. I'm going to skip ahead just for the sake of time here. But all of this is available in the slides. Okay, swallowing. This is our last little push to get through everything. So first and foremost, please see an SLP for a swallowing evaluation if you have concerns. Again, swallowing problems can have really drastic consequences if we don't manage them and address them up front. And diagnostic imaging is really critical to know what's going on. We've really got to see the swallow to know what the heck we're working with, because there's a whole bunch of different types of impairments that could cause, the same symptom of, oh, something's going down the wrong pipe. So we need to see what's going on before we treat it. Now, that being said, these are just some examples of some kind of adaptive equipment that you might use to help you eat and drink more comfortably and more safely. These are things your SLP might recommend for you, or you can always explore these options on your own too. Thickening agents, that's that middle top picture. If a swallow study finds you do better swallowing thickened liquids, and if the texture of thickened liquids doesn't bother you, that there are all sorts of over-the-counter thickening agents available. There are bolus monitoring cups and the safe straw. So these are going to be those two pictures on the far left. These, I think, are really great tools. If you have a swallow study and you find that we see that your swallowing is much safer when you take small controlled sips of liquids. There are products like this which regulate the size of sip that you take each time you swallow. So you can't accidentally get like a big mouthful of water that's hard to control. So that might help you swallow more comfortably. And then there's all sorts of adapted utensils, tableware, and even like cookware, things like cut-resistant safety gloves out there. So general recommendations: see an SLP if you have concerns about your swallowing. Can't stress that enough. Occupational therapy is really great if you have some trouble with dexterity in managing utensils. Also, be sure to work with your physician if you have things like acid reflux or allergies, because those can kind of exacerbate swallowing symptoms. A huge recommendation I give to patients is to keep a journal of your symptoms. With ataxia in particular, swallowing problems can kind of fluctuate in severity. They may not happen every time, since it's a coordination problem rather than like a muscular strength issue. So keep a journal of your symptoms. That could really be invaluable for helping us see the whole picture of what's going on, especially because a swallow study or an evaluation is just a snapshot in time. Additionally, there are basic strategies you can try at home, but I always recommend an individualized evaluation and treatment plan. This is just a list of some simple strategies you might try. Again, just be careful trying any sorts of strategies without kind of knowing what's going on first. But some of these might be things you already do at home, and they might make eating and drinking more comfortable. More research is needed, but depending on your prognosis, there's lots of different options that are out there for both speech and swallowing treatment. Go see a speech-language pathologist if you have concerns. And there are funding options available for adaptive equipment if insurance and paying for things out of pocket is an issue. We made it, we got through all of that. The QR code here is where all of those resources are listed. I included lots of websites and things, so you can scan that now if you want. It'll also be there when you access the slides at a later time. Please email me or stop me in the hallway or at the reception tonight. I'd love to answer any questions and just chat with you and learn from you. I'm really happy to be here, and I appreciate y'all taking the time to come to this talk in particular today. Finally, shameless plug, I'm doing a research survey right now. The link is here, and it's also in your program. And this survey is designed just to help us learn more about the swallowing difficulties that come up in ataxia. It can be completed by people with ataxia as well as caregivers. And even if you don't have swallowing difficulty or you don't think you do, your input still could be really helpful. So you might still consider taking it, even if this isn't a major concern for you at this time. And that's all I've got. So thank you all for listening.
All right, so at this point, I just want to mention a few things that are happening this afternoon. So at 3 o'clock, from 3 to 5, we are doing the afternoon Birds of a Feather session. So on page 5 in your book, you'll see what those sessions are. And so if you are going to attend any of those, we're going to have people outside like we did this morning directing you to the rooms. Additionally, if you are not in those sessions, you can attend in this room adaptive Tai Chi at 3 o'clock. And that's from 3 to 3:30. And at 3:30 to 4, we have rhythmic rehabilitation in this room. So if you weren't able to take advantage of those this morning, you can do that this afternoon. And then at 5 o'clock, from 5 to 6:30, we want you to join us again in the room because we're going to do a meet and greet in-person reception. And this is broken out by region, so it will give you an opportunity to meet others in your region that are here and that have ataxia. And it's a great networking opportunity for you to take advantage of. So that concludes the official programming for today. So you actually have 30 minutes to just kind of chill and relax. And then if you are going to a Birds of a Feather session, make your way out to the hallway and they can direct you to where you need to be. And if not, if you're going to do the Tai Chi, come back here. All right, so I will see all of you at 5 o'clock tonight. Have a great afternoon.